Idomeneus thrust hard at Aramis's mouth with his hard bronze. The spearhead passed on through beneath his brain and split the white brain pan. His teeth were dashed out. Blood filled both his eyes, and from his mouth and nostrils he gasped and spurted blood. That lovely passage is an excerpt from Homer's The Iliad, circa about 753 BC. And here's another one you're probably all familiar with. Flashed all their sabers bare, flashed as they turned in air, sabering the gunner's air, honored the light brigade. That's Tennyson. You all heard me say that a few weeks ago. That's how you write a war poem, right? Because those are the only truths in war. Death, blood, wild charges, and glory. Wrong. Not according to Benjamin Galbuff, the author of The Fairy Fleet of Fredericksburg. He writes about the bloodiest battle in the American Civil War and spends almost the entire poem talking about the weeks that led up to it and the amicability shown between the troops of the North and the South towards each other. He's trying to show you truth about this war. A war where brothers fought brothers. A war where countrymen fight countrymen is an exercise in futility. You can't expect the bonds of a cause to overturn the bonds of a common homeland. That's the truth claim he's trying to get at through his poem. Now, he's going to prove this truth claim by balancing emphasis on the futility of man's preparations to end each other with the contrast of the beauty of their uncharacteristic efforts to aid each other. Listen to this excerpt from the first paragraph. It took a long time for the storm to break at Fredericksburg. Lincoln held Burnside's feet to the fire. The general temporized, while the engineering battalions delayed and the pontoon bridges for the assault across the Rappahannock were late to arrive. You see, the commander of the North, General Burnside, had a lot to prove. He had just replaced General George McClellan, one of the worst generals in Union Army history. He had to prove himself to President Lincoln, and so he creates this great strategy to quickly move his army across the Rappahannock into the town of Fredericksburg, secure it quickly, and use it as a staging ground against Lee later in the war. The poem is quick to point out the futility of all these careful plans and how they're laid to waste when the army arrives before the bridge material arrives and totally loses the element of surprise. Now we're going to transition into the main part of the poem, where Burnside's futility is emphasized even harder. Picture this. The Northern armies camped along the east side of the Rappahannock River, expecting to totally surprise the few occupants guarding the town. Because the bridge supply hasn't arrived on time, the residents alert the rest of Lee's army, and Lee brings his entire force along the west side of the Rappahannock, right across from the north. The poet writes that a holiday atmosphere descends upon the Rappahannock. We see a total degradation of good order and discipline between the men of the North and the South, engaging in blatant fraternization with each other. The author writes that sentries on the river crossed to their counterparts and chatted in the shadows. Men of both armies put tiny sailboats on the river and sent them on the wind to an enemy that seemed under the spell of weather and delay no longer so hostile. So here we have the soldiers of the North and the South totally abandoning their duties and passing the time, instead of guarding their posts, making boats out of ammo crates, trees from the sides of the river, sealing them with tar for the sole purpose of making one another's lives easier. Now, how are they doing this? Well, I'll explain. Imagine you've just gotten out of ESID. You're starving. And there's that one food that you've thought of the entire time in the woods. For me, it was Red Robin. I wanted me some Red Robin. And imagine after that ESID ends, you have that food in your hand, and instead of eating it, you take it and give it to someone who's been without for twice or three times as long as you. This is exactly what the soldiers of the North and South were doing. The North was sending their precious coffee in these boats over to the South, who, because of the Northern blockade, had not had coffee for the last 2 years. The South was doing the same to the North, except for tobacco. These elements of military rations were quite a staple of entertainment and morale for soldiers fighting in the North and the South. So you can imagine what it did for one another to provide each other with those commodities. And this went on for 1 week. One observer writing that the waters were fairly dotted with a fairy fleet of small boats. In the final paragraph of the poem, there's a re-emphasis on Burnside, and really by extension the war's futility. The Union finally moves to charge across the river, intent on seizing the town and acting upon their carefully laid plans to seize Fredericksburg. The poem emphasizes that none of these plans materialize. Lee sends the Union Army back, shattered, with his tail between its legs. The last line of the poem reads, "The Rappahannock rolled on, as rivers do in song, bearing no gifts. The river stands as a pillar of indifference towards the men's efforts to kill each other." In conclusion, the author uses Fairy Fleet as a vehicle for truth. He claims that a war pitting countrymen against countrymen is an exercise in futility, and that the bonds of a common cause are not stronger than the bonds of a common homeland. A call to arms can't make brothers kill each other.